Good morning, everyone. It's the 7th, Tuesday, May 2024. Half the year is almost over, and time just doesn't seem to stop. Oh, glad to see Bhante Sangamaji again. It's been, I think the last time he was here, maybe, at least the last time I saw him was before COVID. It was quite a while. He's 24, 25 vasa now. How does one make it so far in the ropes? The standard answer you hear from Ajahn Jayasaro is, well, don't disrobe. How did you make it to 80 years old? Oh, I didn't die. I also wonder that perhaps the Dhamma is just addictive. After a while, someone becomes addicted to the Dhamma, but that doesn't seem to be the case. The Dhamma is like the antithesis of addiction, the opposite of addiction. There's these two paths which are, diverging, diametrically opposed from one another. You have the path of the Dhamma, the path of truth, the path which seeks wisdom, which is constantly trying to let go of their addictions, to let go of their attachments, their greeds and desire. And the other path, which is the world is quite keen, quite avidly advertising to us, constantly selling us and getting us engaged in, is the path of attachment, of clinging, of sensuality. And so the Buddha, seeing the path which was given to him as a prince in ancient India, very wealthy. He had 3 palaces for each season, I'm sure you've heard before. And so he was enamored, engulfed, surrounded by sensuality. I don't know what it was for him, but at some point he said, well, this is just not it for me. This is not satisfying. Where does this go? Where does this lead to? To what benefit do I live this life? And so he set out to find something meaningful, something valuable. People will say that gold or a big bank account or lots of real estate is valuable, but no matter how hard you might work in this life to achieve, to amass, to gain such property or wealth, at the time of death it slips through our fingers like sand, like air even. It just flows right out. And then from the perspective of rebirth, what goes with us? What can we take with us? And so perplexed by this dilemma, the Buddha really took it to extremes. He took his body to extremes, he took the mind to extremes in efforts to hope to come to grasp and see reality, as it were. So he had lived a life of extreme pleasure, he had another life of extreme poverty, asceticism, lack, these 2 paths. And it was through that contrast where he saw, okay, perhaps something in between is what is needed. A little bit of asceticism, a bit of pulling back from the world, renunciation of the world, living secluded from society, but also a little bit of pleasure, but not the kind of pleasure which people would often seek and think is joyful. We were talking yesterday, there is this kind of pleasure which is, the classic jhana formula, rapture, pleasure, thought and examination, thought and thinking. But it's accompanied by sensuality, accompanied by indulgence in the hindrances almost. It's miccha samadhi. So yeah, you can go out there and experience jhana now, go to a movie or whatever. But what the Buddha saw, what he first saw under that rose apple tree as a child, was this kind of well-being that can be cultivated, which is completely secluded from the world. And I just find it fascinating how in that contrast some kind of understanding can be brought. The world is constantly being pulled through extremes or another. You have the left wing, the right wing, but or whatever other extremes we can think of, but it's often in the nuance where the subtlety can really be beneficial for people. And I enjoy the simile that the Buddha says, is in his quest to see truth. It's like he saw a crack in samsara. He started to knock at the edge of the wall, and he saw a crack of light. Another simile that's often given is he stumbled upon an ancient path that was covered over with dust. I imagine like in the ancient Amazon, or even here in Taiping, going through the jungle, or a deep thicket of rainforest and a thatchet of trees and vines, but somehow you break through and come upon a path, and you realize that it leads somewhere. It leads to a very ancient city of knowledge, a city of understanding. Atlantis. It leads to Atlantis. So in turn, it's just an invitation for all of us to make use of that knowledge, to make use of that city while it's open, for as long as it will be open, because at some point, just as all air leaves our hands when we close the fist, at some point the Dhamma will disappear from the world. And so a daily recollection I like to chew on is, okay, what can I do today? What can I do right now to kind of further myself along this path? Whatever goals I might have. Some of us want, arahantship. Some of us just want to become sotapannas. Some of us just want a peaceful moment. One peaceful moment in our mind. So what can we do that is actionable and possible and within our grasp? I guess it all starts with just stopping and taking a breath and realizing and acknowledging and contemplating and being clear about what our goals are. So, I ask you, what are your goals? What do you hope to achieve? Rebirth in heaven? Rebirth in hell? I don't know. Yeah. Where do you hope to go? And what do you hope to do in this life? But I do also recognize how difficult it is to cultivate the Dhamma. There's that simile of the water being completely covered in water, The water element has gotten out of balance and the entire globe is covered in water. Can you imagine? No place to stand. And so on that planet is some disk, some ring floating around it, being pushed by the north winds, the south winds, the east winds, the west winds. And every 100 years, for whatever reason, a tortoise needs to come up and collect some air, or he simply comes up. What are the chances? What's the likelihood that turtle, that sea turtle, will come up through that ring? Rather unlikely, no? In the same way the Buddha describes, what is the likelihood of a Tathagata arising in the world? It's very, very low. It's a very low chance for us to be reborn as humans. After being reborn as human, it's even lower of a chance for us to gain faith, to hear the Dhamma from the Buddha, and then also to gain faith. But here you are. But after we've gained faith in the Dhamma, it's rare also to go forth and become a monastic. But monasticism aside, the rarest of them is to practice the Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma. And this is where everybody goes off. Because it is diametrically opposed to what the world is pulling us to do, what this body is pulling us to do, what our minds are telling us to do, what the world, our family, society tells us to do. So really, it takes a kind of person, a kind of autonomy, a kind of willingness. You can see it in the suttas, but really this making it personal, creating the sense of self which will lead you to be free from that sense of self. I guess it starts with aspirations. Okay, well, today I won't kill an insect. The next day I won't have a drink. The day after that I'll practice meditation for 5 minutes. At some point I'll read a sutta. All of these are making use of the sense of conceit, of I-ness, but it is cultivating, or I guess you say using these forces against themselves, using these forces against itself, using craving, this desire to practice, this desire to relinquish. In the case of dana, it's a kind of relinquishment. And so there's nothing wrong with craving liberation. But it's not just enough to crave it, but it's how do we do something about it. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. It's a good question. I'll let you know when I find out. Yeah, I mean, as a monastic, you mean? It's really, I especially every time I will check into the news, I'll hear it from my parents, and like nothing really inspires me to go back. There's nothing that I haven't already experienced in my 24 years as a person. So, what is there worth going back to? Everything seems to be getting more and more unstable in the world. And I look at my parents' generation, and they had some kind of idea of an American dream. You can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make it into a middle class kind of lifestyle, and live your life in some kind of fulfillment. But I look at my generation, and especially the next generation, and those coming up, and they've got all kinds of mental issues, and it just seems so crazy, the world now. So, on top of that, from a rebirth perspective, it's like I reflect. It's like, okay, I've done it all before. I've done it all to the highest before. I've been up and down this samsara. When will, from that perspective, and sometimes it's a bit untangible, difficult to see or grasp or feel that, because the only perspective we really have is this life, unless someone has seen into their past lives. But just visualizing that for a bit, it's where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What's worth doing? And thinking back to the time before I became a monk, I just really had this yearning, this desire for like rest. Mandagutta Chitta says it all the time. He's like, you have to feed this body. You have to feed it. You have to bathe it. Such a chore, I find. Maybe it's like an existential laziness, but I just want to. I want peace is the word, but really rest is what I think of. This idea of going to sleep and not waking up again, and that cozy feeling of sleep. So yeah, that's what keeps me going. Just this idea that what else is there to do? And the Buddha says what has to be done has been done, almost as if we all have this responsibility that has to be done. So you might procrastinate on it for 1 lifetime, 2 lifetimes, 100,000 lifetimes, however long, but at some point, like, the responsibility will fall on you at some point. So now's a good time. I'm young. I'll be 30 this year. I feel it. So. Being a monk, at times is difficult. Especially, I remember the first week. It was like the first or second week. I was in one of the kutis, and there's just the forest. You hear the forest sound. You have a book in front of you. Kuti's pretty sparse, empty. No television, no video games, and you're just like the mind is like, okay, rest of my life. It's like, but after a while, you kind of settle into the lifestyle. You become accustomed to what it means to be a monk, and you get used to what's not there, and it becomes easier at some point. The biggest question I think most monastics deal with is, do I have what it takes? Can I, as we were just talking about, do I have what it takes to practice the Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma, to really put forth that effort? The Buddha says, it's not by lower means that the Supreme is attained, but it's by the Supreme, by a great deal of effort, that Nibbana is attained. And so many monastics, I think most Westerners at least, they ordain with that in mind. Okay, how can I achieve the highest? But when you realize how steep that mountain is, sometimes it's a bit daunting. Okay, well, it's about that time. So I think we can, to wind down, we can all close our eyes. And just to take something away from this, think about what was said today that I can incorporate into my life, if anything. I hope something. What can I do to grow in wholesome states? And what can I do to relinquish, to give away unwholesome states? How can I live my life so that it fulfills the Buddha's teachings? Not by lighting incense or spreading flowers, but practicing the Dhamma in accordance with the Dhamma.